Welcome to the 10th of Ararat Consulting's 10-part series called The 10 Commandments of Conflict Resolution. In this 10th video section, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to completely resolve a conflict so that it doesn't come back. Now, sounds pretty simplistic. It isn't. What ends up happening with conflict resolution is if you're the person who's in the position of playing adjudicator, referee, he feels like mom and dad sometimes, or effectively, you're in the position of authority and you have to make a judgment call as to how the conflict between the two warring parties is going to be solved. That's a very difficult position to be in. Why? Because as we were saying in the previous video, the parties that are in conflict with each other are going to be emotionally connected to their position. In previous videos, we said perception is reality, or we said there's a conflict of perception. So when we have two parties, which we have called them party A, Andy, and party B, Barbara, when Andy and Barbara have this conflict and you have to bring them together to solve the conflict, Andy's going to believe he's right, Barbara's going to believe that she's right. Neither of them think they're bad, neither of them think they're wrong. So if Barbara doesn't believe she's bad, if she doesn't believe that she's wrong, then the problem must be with Andy. By the same token, Andy doesn't believe he's a bad guy, he doesn't believe he's wrong, otherwise there would be a conflict. So Barbara's got to be the guilty party, and that's the way the psychology works. Your job is to have the proverbial wisdom of Solomon and decide how to solve this conflict. But if you want the problem to absolutely go away and not come back, then what we have to do is we have to get to a point of what's called reconciliation. And as an easy definition, we're going to say reconciliation is when both of these parties are no longer warring. Both of the parties agree. Your job is to get them into agreement. Agreement with what? Agreement with your judgment call. So how do you do that? You do that by what we taught you in the first 9 videos. So the first 9 videos were, think of them as building blocks. We were building piece by piece by piece by piece a foundation of what? The psychology and the sociology as to why people don't resolve conflict. Well, you say, is that true? Do people not resolve conflict? Well, why is the divorce rate 60%? Of course people don't resolve conflict. Why do people quit their jobs? And by the way, when someone quits their job and they're a good employee, remember, you got 2 warring people, okay? So we're going to say that Andy's awesome, A for Andy, and Barbara's bad, B for bad. So what ends up happening? Andy, he quits, and you're left with Barbara, unless you make the right decision. And you have to make a decision whereby both parties can agree that you were the wise conflict resolution guru. So how do you do that? You do that by diagnostics. So if you've seen the first 9 segments of this video training series on conflict resolution, great. I'm going to give you a very short summary of it. Now, by the way, if somehow you got on to section 10, this section on reconciliation, and you haven't seen the first 9 videos, I'm just going to strongly encourage you, you're going to need to watch it. Because if you don't watch the first 9 videos, then what I'm going to say next just isn't going to make sense, and you're going to end up wasting like 20 minutes of your time. I don't want you to do that. The first 9 videos, again, are foundational. They go step by step by step by step. And the best way to explain that is by using the TV series that probably all of us have seen, House MD. So, House MD with Greg Laurie. Remember, this is the guy that's, perpetually stoned on, opioids, but he's an absolute genius when it comes to diagnostics. So what ends up happening at the beginning of every show, there's somebody and they've got some sort of weird disease. They show up in the hospital, and then House shows up with his team. They do a little bit of diagnostic testing. They ask a few questions. And then what happens for the rest of the program is they keep going back to their war room. This is where House writes things on a whiteboard, puts all these different differential or different types of diagnoses. That's what we call it in medicine, a differential diagnosis. And then he challenges these younger doctors to say, could it be this? Could it be that? Which is right? Which is wrong? And for the rest of the program, these young doctors, by trial and error, keep coming up with the wrong answer. And House, the genius, the guru, walks them through a step-by-step process until they get the diagnosis right. And when you get the diagnosis right, then medically speaking, the treatment will work. And when the treatment works, the body's cured. Except what we've been saying is that we're not talking about the physical body like medicine. We're talking about your corporation. The word corporation comes from the word corpus. Corpus means body. So your corporate body, if you've got conflict, makes the company unhealthy. And just like the physical body, if all of the parts of the body aren't functioning properly, well, then the whole body doesn't function properly. In the corporate world, it's the same thing. If one part of the corporate body isn't functioning properly, sales or distribution or marketing or accounting or finance, if one part of your corporate body isn't working properly, it affects all the parts of the body. The parallel is there, which is why we encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, because we have a video called Diagnosing Corporate Disease, the parallels between medicine and management. And that's what we've been presenting to you all the way through the first 9 videos. And I want to continue along that theme as it relates to the program House MD. And why House MD? Because House MD was the most popular television series on the planet. It ran for 9 seasons and it won the People's Choice Award 9 times. It won something called the Peabody Award, if you've ever heard of it. It's one of the most prestigious awards you can win, not just in television, but television, movies, social media. It won 2 Golden Globe Awards and had the most expensive commercial time of any show on television. House MD was incredibly successful. But you know what? If you look at the program, you ask yourself, why? I mean, every episode was exactly the same. It starts off, patient's got a disease, nobody knows how to cure it. 60 minutes later, the patient's cured. The same thing over and over again. I mean, how boring, right? And then the other thing was, the entire program was in medical jargon. Because unless you were a physician, unless you had some sort of medical training, you'd have no idea what they're even talking about. So how is this the most popular television series in the world? I'm going to tell you why. Because sociologically speaking and psychologically speaking, House MD had a formula that worked with everybody. And the formula was, we like to win. We like to be able to solve a puzzle. And although every episode was the same, every episode was about losing a patient's life unless you could win. Every episode was about getting things wrong, and then ultimately having a victory. It was about solving a puzzle, and everybody likes to solve a puzzle. That's why you didn't have to understand the medical jargon. Every episode still made sense. Well, you're supposed to be the genius. You're supposed to be the guru. You're supposed to be the master healer of whatever your corporate dis-ease is. That's what this particular episode is about, because we're going to teach you that there's 2 different outcomes of whatever decision you make. There's a good outcome here, which is reconciliation, and then there's a bad outcome. So sometimes the best way to diagnose what's going wrong is to look at what isn't happening. See, what we want to happen is reconciliation. We're going to do it backwards. We're going to say what isn't happening. If your conflict doesn't go away completely, if the body, the corporate body, isn't cured, the reason for that psychologically is something called resentment. Now, resentment's a psychological term, and what it is an emotional response to a situation where I feel that something's not right, something's not equitable, something doesn't have justice, it's not fair. If you make a decision and one party, Barbara or Andy, or worse, both, somehow feel that the decision that you make isn't equitable, it's not fair, it's not right, they might walk out of your office saying, okay, this is supposedly over, but it isn't over, because they're going to stay in this place of resentment. Now, psychologically speaking, there's a feedback loop. So if you go back to our previous episodes, and we were talking about biofeedback loops, And we're saying they can be positive biofeedback loops or negative feedback loops. We used epinephrine or noradrenaline as one of the examples. Well, the same thing happens psychologically. There is a feedback loop. If I am somebody that I'm at war with somebody else and you're supposed to be solving my problem, if you do not get me to a point where I agree with the other person and they agree with me, I'll walk out of your office with a sense of resentment. But that sense of resentment becomes a biofeedback loop and it spirals. And unfortunately, everybody, it spirals down and down and down, kind of like a black hole, or if you're not in astrophysics, kind of like a toilet bowl. Okay, so if I'm feeling a sense of resentment, then that resentment is actually going to get worse and worse and worse. And I go beyond resentment in what's called a cascade reaction. And it gets to a point where I will actually sabotage your authority, your decisions, the division I work in, the branch office. And I'll do that because I will feel that this isn't fair. And then what I do is I get together and I gossip with the rest of my coworkers. And I do something called the us versus them approach, or divide and conquer. I need people to agree with my side of things, that whatever you decided wasn't fair. I need people to decide that Barbara got off easy. Well, you know what? If Barbara's not satisfied, she's doing the exact same thing. So now that we know that there's a difference, a paradoxical difference between reconciliation and resentment, now that we understand from our previous videos that if we have resentment, that we can get a biofeedback loop that cascades downwards like a vortex, okay, a negative biofeedback loop. Now what you need to understand is if you're on this side of the resolution, the bad side, not the awesome side, that you as a manager are continuing going to have stress. Okay? So studies have shown that when you get into higher management, people take early retirement or worse, they die. I'm talking medically now. They die because of the stress. The stress of what? Not being able to resolve conflict. Why? Because resolving conflict is your job and my job. So whether you're a supervisor, and I've been a supervisor earlier in my life on different jobs, whether you're a senior executive, I've been on boards of directors for international healthcare organizations. I know what it's like to be a senior executive. Or whether you're the owner or the CEO. Well, I'm the owner or CEO of several companies. I know what all the pressure is, and so do you. But that pressure can affect your life, and it affects your life and it can ruin your health. More than that, if you don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, I mean, if you've worked really hard to ascend your way up, and as you take on higher levels of management, you've ascended your way up, and ideally, we get paid more, but we don't necessarily get thanked more. As a matter of fact, sometimes it feels pretty thankless. So in my spare time, I like to spend time with family. I like to go out and eat. I like to go out to beautiful places where I can play golf on really nice golf courses. That's what I really like to do. But if I'm spending all my energy, emotion, and effort constantly being called in to do stressful things, then you know what? Maybe the position isn't worth it. It's not worth it to my health, it's not worth it to my family, and I don't get to play golf. I don't get to enjoy the finances that come with that type of responsibility. Well, that's kind of a bad deal all the way around. So what we want for you, if you're a supervisor, manager, senior executive, or CEO, is we want you to learn how to resolve conflict so it never comes back. Because if you're on the resentment side of things, it's like dandelions. You can cut the head off a dandelion, but the roots of the problem are still there. And the dandelion just grows back next week. And you're constantly cutting off dandelion heads. And you never heal your lawn. You with me? Okay. So, reconciliation, this is what we're looking for, requires that all parties in argument, in our situation, Andy and Barb, that they're in agreement. How do you get them into agreement? You get them into agreement by following the first 9 steps in the first 9 videos. So please let me say this again. If you haven't watched those 9 videos, you really need to. Even if you've watched them, it doesn't take long to watch them again. Take some notes. Because what we're teaching you to do is to be like Dr. House. We're teaching you how to make the correct diagnosis. And if you've seen my TED Talk, in my TED Talk where I'm talking about disengagement and I'm talking about ways that people feel that superiors don't care for them based on the studies that we've done, then as far as people feeling that you don't care for them or I don't care for them, it's really easy to diagnose why they feel that way. You just have to know how to do the diagnosis. And the way you do the diagnosis is the first thing you do is you listen to what the problem is, and then, as according to my TED Talk, you start to dig under the surface. And the way we dig under the surface is we listen to the backstories of each of these people. And we, the person resolving the conflict, that's me, that's you, you're writing down notes. Why are you writing down notes? You're sending a message. So if Andy's giving his backstory, the message to Barb is write notes. And then when Barb's talking and giving all of the details in her backstory, Andy should be writing notes. Why? Because you're going to be really smart. You're going to be like House. You're going to ask probing questions to gain understanding. You're going to ask probing questions to figure out if the doctors that you're supervising even have a clue as to what's going on, because you will, because you took good notes. So when Andy talks and then he stops talking, Barb has to repeat back what he says. And ideally, she'll do it with notes because that's what you've been learning how to do. When Barb finishes talking, Andy's supposed to repeat back what she said. According to what? According to his notes, not his memory. In House, House is a genius, but he's writing everything down on a whiteboard. Okay, so even though doctors are fairly smart and, yeah, sure, we're fairly educated, and House in the program was a genius, and there are doctors that are geniuses, by the way, amazing people, but they still write things down. They keep track of their thoughts. Well, you have to do the same. More importantly, you have to teach Andy and Barb to do the same. Because when Andy has to repeat back what Barb said from his notes, when she has to repeat back what Andy said from her notes, it forces them to listen to the other person's side of the story. It helps them become sympathetic. It helps them become empathetic. And that's going to become extremely important. Because if all they do is, like children, they won't put their hands over their ears, but they're doing this. This is Andy saying, I'm not listening to her, I'm not listening to her, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. And Barbara's doing the same thing. And by the way, you don't have to have your hands over your ears. If Barb's leaning back and her arms are crossed and her face looks like this, you know for sure she's not listening. If we're only thinking about what we're going to say next, or if we're just waiting for the other person's mouth to stop talking, if that's what you're seeing, she's not paying attention. She's just waiting for him to take a breath so she can jump in. By definition, if I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next, I'm interrupting, because I'm interrupting mentally. You can't listen to what someone says and formulate your argument in the same time. It is impossible. But this is what people do all the time, so you have to be watching for that as well. This is all in those other 9 videos. Your job right now is to get to reconciliation. That's where everybody agrees. If you don't get to agreement, they're going to walk out. They're going to have resentment. It becomes a downward spiral. They'll play us versus them. They'll play divide and conquer. Andy will collect his allies. Barbara will collect her allies. And everybody now is complaining about how you did this wrong. And somehow the company isn't fair. Somehow the company doesn't listen. Somehow the company is apathetic. And that's your reputation. And you'll have to keep dealing with these dandelions, these conflicts, week after week. And you'll never get to go play golf at Myrtle Beach or Kapalua or North Carolina. Okay? And that's not what we want for you. Go to www.ararat.com. Click on our conflict resolution. We'll show you how to get the training that you need to learn how to be the guru, the genius that, like Dr. House, gets to agreement. And when everybody agrees, then the treatment that you come up with, which is your judgment call and your recommendation, will be correct. Both of these parties will be happy. You will be a hero. and it won't come back. It won't rebound, right? It won't return. It won't re-blossom like dandelions, and you won't suffer from gastric reflux. That's what we want for you. Thanks for watching this so far, and we look forward to hearing from you. Send us an email once you've seen the video at www.ararat.com under conflict resolution, and we're looking forward to helping you become a genius like Dr. House.